Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. You can see I've got my ball cap on and it's got a crow on it. So that means it's time for a walk and talk. We're out at a location and we're going to share this location together. So where we are today is the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve. That's a mouthful. So I'll give you a picture of the sign. Estuarine is an amazing word. It was not in my vocabulary. I know what an estuary is, and we're going to visit an estuary for sure, but estuarine is the modifier form. It's the adjective word for estuary. So we're at the Elkhorn Slough Reserve. So we're going to explore this together, and I'll show you a lot of interesting things about it. So as I walk back down toward the parking lot and the ranger station, let's catch up here. This reserve is open to the public, but its purpose is actually research. They have a nice ranger station, and it's a great place to bring families and kids to learn about nature and learn about this area. I've been here many times. It's not open every day. It's open 3 or 4 days a week, and toward the end of the week it's open. I think it's open most weekends. So we are very near to the coast of the Pacific, but more specifically, we're very near to Monterey Bay. Monterey Bay is a very large bay. Its coastline is C-shaped. The bottom of Monterey Bay is Monterey and Pacific Grove. That's the south side. The north side of Monterey Bay is Santa Cruz, California. And then the east side is a town of Moss Landing, which is a very small town, but it has a landmark that you can see for miles, and that is the power plant with the large chimneys, the 2 tall smokestacks that are characteristic of that power station. An interesting aside is that power station at Moss Landing is completely obsolete, and so it was deactivated in favor of another generating plant on the same location, but the 2 smokestacks are no longer needed. So as the old generating station was torn down, the decision was made to keep the smokestacks. These 2 smokestacks are landmarks that people use for navigation. If you are sailing a boat in Monterey Bay and you look over and you see those twin smokestacks, you know where you are with respect to Moss Landing. Also, an airplane navigating by visual navigation methods can easily orient itself to its location by seeing those 2 smokestacks. So I am most grateful that they chose to keep them, not because of a sense of nostalgia, but more of a sense of stability. It's something that people use for navigation. It's a landmark that we are used to seeing. I walked through the parking lot and we are at the visitors center. So you can see the visitor center sign behind me. This is the area where the public is welcomed. A lot of kids come here. A lot of families come here. It's very quiet. Today it's a Friday, early afternoon on a Friday, and there's virtually no one here. I'm going to turn around, and the smokestacks of Moss Landing are in the distance. Because of this wide-angle lens, they may not be visible in the video. I must admit, when I was a kid, I wasn't very interested in visitor centers and talking to rangers. I was interested in going out and seeing what I could see. But I've learned as I grow up that you get a lot of information if you just go in and strike up a conversation with one of the rangers, one of the people who know stuff, and they can fill you in on a lot. So this reserve is dedicated to the Elkhorn Slough, and it has evolved over many years. Much of the land that was incorporated into this open space, this reserve, came from a dairy farm. The dairy farm started in 1915, and it operated as a dairy farm until 1972, when the land became dedicated to the Elkhorn Slough Reserve. The dairy farm reclaimed a lot of land from the slough by using levees or dikes. These are two terms for earthworks that block the flow of water, and then they pump the water out. And so very low areas of the land were cleared of water by using pumps and barriers called levees or dikes, and that increased the amount of farmland available for grazing the cattle. So this was a dairy farm during those times, and we'll see evidence of a dairy barn that was part of the old farm. Now we get to the first thing that comes up here, something to show you, something to share. This device I'm looking at, and I'm going to show you, is part of a network of sensors for seismic research. California has a lot of earthquakes, a lot of seismic activity, and there's a lot of interest in understanding it better and maybe even predicting when the big one's going to happen. So EarthScope is a system for detecting seismic activity, and the stations look like this. So that is the station right there. That is the EarthScope station. It has a precision GPS device, and it's hooked by telemetry to a computer so that the data from this can be integrated with data from other stations to give the researchers a better picture of seismic activity. You can see these stations all over California. As we continue on our way, I will point out that there are educational signs so that visitors can look at what they are seeing here and interpret it. And the signs, of course, are in English, but also in Spanish. Here we have a sign that explains this grassland habitat. It showcases some of the animals, some of the creatures that you see here. California, Northern California, is described as having a Mediterranean climate. That is, we get rain mostly in a relatively short period of time, say 3 or 4 months, mostly in the late fall and winter. And then most of the year we have no rainfall. So here you can see a lot of grass, and it's all brown, it's all dead, because this is the dry part of the season, and we'll probably start getting rain here on a regular basis within the next 6 weeks or so. When the grass is this dry, wildfires are a concern. So if people have big tracts of grasslands like this, and they are this dry, then frequently they create fire breaks to prevent the uncontrolled spread of fire on that grassland. This slough is connected with Monterey Bay, which is of course part of the Pacific Ocean. So then the question arises, what about the salinity? Is this water fresh water? Is it salt water? Is it in between? If you have the in-between mixture of salt water and fresh water, that's called brackish water. And so the question I posed, what's the nature of this water? Is it Is it seawater? Is it freshwater? Or is it brackish? It used to be historically brackish because you had a lot of groundwater seeping into the slough. You had a lot of fresh water going toward the slough, and so you had the admixture of fresh and seawater, and that would be brackish. However, at the present time, the human use of fresh water is such that this slough doesn't really receive much inflow of fresh water. So all the water that you see in this slough should be considered basically seawater with salinity that matches that of the Pacific Ocean. Here you have a view of the old farm. That's the old barn. That's a dairy barn that was in use until 1972. As I pan to the left, you may be able to see the power plant in the picture. With this wide-angle lens, you may or may not see it, but that's the power plant of Moss Landing. I enjoy coming here because this place is not overrun with tourists. It has very few. The visitors here, the few visitors that I encounter here are usually very thoughtful, very friendly, and they show good citizenship. In terms of the audio on this recording, I have my wireless mic, and it has this fuzzy thing on the top of it, and that's actually a funny name it has. This fuzzy thing on the top of the microphone is to block wind noise, and to a greater or lesser extent it will do that. I use it all the time when I record outdoors, and we'll have to see how much of this wind noise comes into play. But this fuzzy little thing on the microphone has a slang name attached to it in the recording and filmmaking industry. It is called a dead cat. So indeed, no cats are involved, and certainly no cats died in service of this device, but this is called a dead cat. So hopefully we will not have a problem with wind noise here today, owing to the features of the sound system that we have and owing to the presence of a dead cat. So this is a barn that you can see is busy trying to fall down. There's a sign on the other side that says, "Stay out of here, it's dangerous." That makes sense. There are a lot of animals here in the reserve, but they are very skilled at hiding. So it is possible to come here and see relatively few animals. On the road, frequently you will see droppings from typically predators that have been deposited on the road. When you encounter animal droppings, particularly predator droppings, and you pay attention to it, that is frequently referred to in English as scat. So if you are looking at some scat, you're looking at animal droppings, and people who are knowledgeable about nature and animals frequently will study the contents of the scat to determine what animal it might be, and in particular what that animal might be eating, because there are remnants of the food in the scat. Here we are at the bottom side of this large barn. You can't really tell what was inside it. I can see what looks like some equipment that's stored in there. View of the barn is blocked by these reeds, these dried plants that are mostly oriented vertically are just described as reeds. It's not a specific term. It's a general term for long, slender vegetation like this. These are reeds. Okay, we have arrived at the big dairy barn. You can see features over here where the dairy cows would stick their heads in to feed at a trough. And this is the way they managed the food at this farm, feeding the dairy cattle. Indeed, the cattle would graze on the grassland, but dairy farmers typically supplement the grazing on grass. Having left the barn, we're making our way down to the estuary, down to the slough itself. There's a lot to see here. There's a lot going on. I pointed out that a lot of the animals in this area are hidden and you don't see much of them, but that is not the case up here. So I'm going to give you a view of what's going on in the estuary. It's extraordinary. So this is an area where pelicans come to feed. The water is shallow, there's a lot of marine life, and pelicans are hungry. As we walk down here, there is a dock, and this is not a structure from the original dairy farm. This is a structure created for the Elkhorn Reserve so that people can come out and take a closer look at the reserve. Okay, so here we are at the dock, walking out over the estuary. For someone making videos, this would be a great place for a dolly shot or a drone shot. But of course, drones are forbidden in this reserve. There's no using of a drone. And we have to respect that. That regulation is there for a reason. When you get out to the end of the dock, there are a couple of signs that explain this habitat. When I was in the visitor center, the ranger explained to me that this shallow marine habitat in the slough is important for the propagation of a number of species of marine creatures, including leopard sharks and various rays. Here you get a closer look of the behavior of the pelicans, diving in, grabbing small fish, and then moving. It's quite a display, quite a treat to be this close to these birds feeding like this. So in this location, you can see a lot of finger-shaped projections out into the water. And these structures were actually not made for the dairy farm. These are structures created for the estuary. These finger-like projections of earthwork create protected water, and they create an environment ideal for the rearing of small marine animals like the leopard shark and the bat ray, so that these creatures can develop in a relatively protected environment until they're big enough to make their way out to open ocean. In open ocean, their chance of survival would be much decreased. So as we walk back up toward other areas in the reserve, leaving the estuary, I was thinking about the sensations of being here and remembering many previous visits. I like this place. It's a lovely place to come for a walk, to collect your thoughts. You could probably compose a lot of poetry walking out here. This is a great place to, be with yourself. One of the things I notice when I come here is the characteristic smell. It smells like no other place I've ever been. It's a symphony of aromas, a lot of which comes from the marine environment that is very close to us where we just were. That is salt water. It's a salt marsh, and it has some very characteristic smells. But this dry grass also gives off an odor that is typical of being here. Here we have some spent flowers that have turned into seeds. These seeds are ready to release, drift on the wind, and bring on the next generation of this plant. The shape of the flower suggests a thistle of some sort. In its dried state, it's hard to recognize, but this is a thistle plant, all dried out, ready to release its seeds. One of the important thistle plants in Northern California, particularly in this area, is the artichoke. An artichoke is a thistle, and when we eat artichokes, we're eating the blossom of the artichoke plant. Farming artichokes in this area is big business. There are stores and restaurants dedicated to artichokes. So we have returned from the lower land back up to the bluff, up to the hillside. And we're back to the paved road behind me. One of the nice things about this reserve is they have made certain that people with impaired mobility have access to this. So you can wheel someone in a wheelchair or a stroller right down here to the end of the pavement with great ease. And so it can be shared with really virtually all members of our society. And I think that's a very good thing they have done. I branched off the paved trail, the paved road, and this is another unpaved road suitable for walking or for vehicles for the park. There is no traffic here with visitors, but the vehicles for the park can come down these roads. In this area, we're going to see a lot of oak trees. We are now in a grove of trees. We're substantially in the center of the trees. I'm entertaining the probability that these trees are oak trees. Some of them are very old and show signs of events past. So here you can see evidence of an injury to this tree. There's a section of dead wood inside, and the tree is growing over it. You can see over here that an entire trunk of the tree broke off, presumably in a windstorm, and the remnants are down here on the ground, rotting away slowly. The limbs come down and make contact with the ground, which is not terribly common in my experience. Now, as children, kids love to climb trees, and of course the inviting nature of these trees is they would be relatively easy to climb because the limbs are so close to the ground. A kid could get right on those limbs. Here's evidence of a previous event. So this is a different habitat. There's very little vegetation on the ground because this ground is covered with shadow most of the time, so you don't see the growth of small plants underneath these trees. So here you can see a box that has been placed high in a tree. The box has an opening. It's not a very large opening, box being made out of plywood. And there is a platform outside the opening of the box so that some creature should be able to stand on that platform as it goes in and out of that box. I don't know what that box represents. I saw another one of these in the barn, in the big dairy barn. high up in the rafters of the barn. So I will inquire at the visitor center what that box is, and I will report back to you. Really, when you visit any place and you find it's an adventure, including a lot of things you don't know, it's a great time to start asking questions, and that way you can learn. This is an interesting site. So here we have a tree, but then there's this other plant, this other tree that is climbing the big tree. The foliage of the smaller tree, this green colored foliage, is climbing up. Again, this is an opportunity for me to ask questions in the visitor center and learn something. So we're getting back to the visitor center, and I will ask questions of the ranger. I must admit that when I have visited places around the world, I have been guilty of going to the usual tourist places. Sometimes I resist, sometimes I don't. I have to admit, I've been to the top of the Eiffel Tower once. I've been to the Arc de Triomphe once. I've walked down the Champs-Élysées. That was nice. It's tempting to go to the usual places for, tourist photos. And there's nothing wrong with that. But people come and go from the Bay Area, and they typically don't come to a place like this. I've enjoyed our time here. I will go in and query the staff and report to you shortly on what we saw out there. Okay, I just asked a series of probative questions to the staff and got a bunch of clear answers. The vine climbing the tree was referred to very clearly as a vine, but nothing more specific. The box in the tree represents one of many. Those are placed here by the researchers. They are purpose-built, and that box that I showed you is for owls to nest. The opening is quite large. The opening you could easily stuff a loaf of bread through, and that box is for owl nesting. They have smaller boxes with smaller openings designed for bluebirds and other songbirds. This reserve is not just hands-off wilderness, it's actually a research station, and she assured me that the researchers are monitoring those nest boxes to see what kind of animals are using them, and then they clean them out every year and prepare them for the next litter. The trees in that hammock where we saw the trees that were all misshapen, those are indeed oak trees. It's a fun thing to go to a reserve like this, catalog your questions, and then pose those questions to the staff so that you have really a robust learning experience from your visit. So that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I invite comments below. This is our walk and talk series. If you like this kind of video, let me know. I can make a lot of these. I enjoy sharing the wonders of Northern California with people who are interested. So comments below if you please, and I hope you join us in future videos. See you soon.